The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. It's nice to be able to talk about Kshtigarbha today because Kshtigarbha doesn't turn away from anyone and he helps beings. I was struck by the songs, the invocations and litany that we sang today, that if you have even one thought of a Mahayana Sutra, if you even think the name of Kshtigarbha, he will help you. And I realized today what they're saying, well, this is what I think it's saying, is that we have to want to turn towards the Buddha or turn towards Kshtigarbha. If we don't, then Kshtigarbha can't help us. The Buddhas and ancestors can't help us. So it's a two-way street. Kshtigarbha and the other bodhisattvas, the Buddhas and ancestors, are always there helping us. They do not turn away from anyone. No one is judged. Everyone is helped in whatever way is needed. And but the help is the training, basically. What Kshtigarbha is showing us is that there is a way out of suffering. But you have to want to do it. You have to want to turn towards that which is greater than ourselves and put the teaching into practice and walk that path. And then you will be given all the help that you need along the way. And I have found this to be very true for myself. That when I'm floundering, I generally call out for help. So I don't have a problem with that. But help is given in some way. And somehow we're shown the way to walk out of our suffering. Sometimes we would like it to be easy, to just feel the compassion of Avalokiteshvara or feel the gentleness and loving kindness of Kshtigarbha and just kind of float in that. But that really doesn't work. Even when we are with other beings who are demonstrating the love and kindness of Kshtigarbha, the love of the eternal, we can feel very nice around them. I mean, it feels good when someone is very gentle and kind, and they're showing us that there's a different way than the harshness of the world. And that is extremely helpful, but it's temporary because we have to find that within ourselves. And we can. We can if we persevere. So Kshtigarbha is the Sanskrit word that we use for this bodhisattva. And for a long time, we used the Japanese word because Reverend Master Jiyu trained in Japan, and that was Jizo. In China, it's Ti-tsang Pusa. And Kshtigarbha means earth store or womb of the earth. Kshtigarbha is known as the protector of animals, children, women in childbirth, and travelers. In other words, those who are in vulnerable situations. He is also the bodhisattva who has vowed to help all beings in the hells, and he will not become a Buddha until all the hells are vacated. So that's quite a vow. And it's probably not easy being in the hells. there's a lot of stress and suffering, and pain and grief and delusion and just not knowing what to do. I was noticing the different depictions we have of Kshtigarbha, and there are 3 different depictions. This one over here is, you can see the gentle face, and he's got one leg down so that he can just move as soon as he needs to when some being is in need of help. And this one over here is how he's often portrayed as just a simple monk. And often, people are aware of monks, and they recognize in the monk someone who is training, and hopefully is gentle and kind, but, we work at it. We have the same stuff you do. And he also shows us that we too can find enlightenment. We too, as he has, we can as well. And then the one on the altar is he's standing at the gates of the hells, opening the gates with his staff, so that he can enter and help beings in the hells. Just a little information about Kshtigarbha, who is sometimes seen as a female and sometimes as a male, and sometimes something in between. He was first heard about in India about 600 years after the Buddha's death, when the Mahayana school of Buddhism first emerged. So we are part of the Mahayana school. There's also the Theravadan school, and the Theravadan school doesn't have bodhisattvas. I'm sure there are bodhisattvas helping everyone in the Theravadan school, but they don't talk about bodhisattvas in the way that we do, I think. I've never been involved in Theravadans. It's just what my notes say. So he is not found in Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Cambodia, where Theravadan Buddhism is the main practice. But he is found in Tibet, Manchuria, China, Japan, Korea, and the United States. And I'm sure there are other countries that he is now found in. He, she. In China, he was considered the savior of those in the 6 realms of existence. And in Japan, he was known as the protector of animals, children, and women in childbirth. And he or she is one of the 4 main bodhisattvas in the Mahayana school of Buddhism. One is Avalokiteshvara, who represents great compassion. She who hears the cries of the world. The all-embracing compassion of that which is. Nothing and no one and no aspect of ourselves is turned away from. And we can know this in our meditation. I used to be, I can't say the critical mind or judgmental mind is gone, but I used to be very critical of my anger. So I actually am a very angry person. Not as much as I used to be, but I have a lot of anger arise. And one time in meditation, I just felt that compassion, that all-embracing compassion of the anger. The anger was not something bad. It was just something that was arising. And it was pretty nice having that happen. Samantabhadra represents the great love and universal goodness. Manjusri represents great wisdom. And Kshtigarbha is known for his great vow to help and deliver all beings. I love this great compassionate vow that I've written down here. If I do not go to the hells, who else will go? If the hells are not empty, I will not become Buddha. Only when all living beings have been saved will I attain Bodhi. The Sutra of the Past Vows of Erstor Bodhisattva is the oldest sutra about Kshtigarbha that has survived, and it is recited and venerated today. And the litany that we sang today is taken from this sutra. It is said that the sutra was spoken by the Buddha towards the end of his life in the Triyastrimcha heaven as a mark of gratitude to his mother, who was there and had died before she could hear the Dharma. This sutra speaks of the origins of this Bodhisattva and his many transformations to help beings in different situations. It describes the various hell realms in detail and Kshtigarbha's promise to the Buddha to work unceasingly to save those who would be left in the hells, still caught in suffering after the Buddha's death until the time of the next Buddha. So in the litany that we sang, the Buddha is calling on Kshtigarbha. The Buddha is about to die, and he really cares about all beings. He wants to help all beings because that is our true nature. When we touch on that great compassion, that great love, we feel compassion for all beings. And we like to help. We don't go out purposely looking for beings to save or help or show them the way, but as it arises, we're willing to do the work. We're willing to listen to someone who is in a difficult situation. We're willing to point people in the right direction. We're willing to be kind, no matter how we feel ourselves. So the Buddha and all the Bodhisattvas are calling on Kshtigarbha to please help all beings until the next Buddha comes. And I love it when he says, "Oh, Shakyamuni, please do not be worried. I will help everyone." It's nice to know that there is something or somebody that does not turn away from us, that does not turn away from anybody, no matter what. There is no aspect of ourselves or other beings that are turned away from. That there is something or someone that is always helping us and all beings. And I just thought I'd mention the 6 realms of existence. The humans, we're one realm. The Asuras, Devas, Hells, hungry ghosts, and animals. And Kshtigarbha helps in all these realms. These are also the states of mind that we go through in our lives. And I think we can relate to that more than different realms. But we can find ourselves in hell, just by our actions and what our mind is doing. It is said that beings fall into the hells because of their unconverted anger, because of acting on their anger. What did I write here? And what helps us when we fall into the hells? Well, sometimes it takes falling into the hells or the other realms in which there is suffering, which, as you can see, the human realm is one of them in which there is suffering. Sometimes it takes a lot of suffering before we'll turn around. Because if we're in a pleasant place, like the Deva world, often we don't turn around because life is pleasant. And we may have no reason. But when we're suffering, that is the time, our greatest opportunity to turn towards the Buddha. We may not even know about the Buddha yet, but we know we have to do something. We know we have to do something to change, to find a way out. And this is when we're truly helped. We're shown the teaching. We're receptive to the teaching. We can put the teaching into practice. And it is learning how to be still in the midst of conditions, in the midst of anger, And I can tell you that is not easy. But this is the way out of suffering. And if we want to find the way out of suffering, we have a path to follow that is not easy. And it can go against all our ingrained habits of how we defend ourselves in this world and how we kind of cover up the suffering that we have. One of the monks once told me that when he came to the monastery, he was living in a hell. And he felt like Reverend Master Ji went down into that hell and pulled him out, and then showed him how to train. And I feel that way. I didn't have that kind of image, but I felt like when I came here, I was truly suffering. And in my own way, I think I was ready to do just about anything to find a way out of it. And I felt like Reverend Master Ji showed me the way. You know, she showed me the way. She showed me her kindness and compassion, as she did everyone. What I had been searching for, which I didn't even know, was someone who was demonstrating selfless compassion. Someone who was real. Someone who had found something true and was living that life and showing it to others, because she held out her faith to all of us. And seeing that helped us along. And yet, we had to find our own way. She didn't let us just hang on to her and hang on to her coattails, but we had to find our own way out. She would point the way, as the Buddha did, but we had to find our own way out of our own hell or our own situation. And I have found that calling out for help has helped me enormously. Calling out to, I used to just go to the Avalokiteshvara shrine all the time and ask for help. And since I've been preparing this talk, I've been calling on Jizo, Kshtigarbha. In some ways, they're very similar. They're very similar. And having the humility to cry out for help, having the willingness to cry out for help, can turn our hearts around, can turn us towards that which can help us, because it's always there. And I thought I'd tell you a dream I had, which I've told, I think, times before. But when I was a newish monk, I had a dream where I was in this restaurant where it was very dark and gloomy. And then I was walking through a corridor, which was even worse. There were, on either side of the corridor, it was a narrow corridor, there were beings suffering. And there was darkness and despair. And there was a door at the end of the corridor. And I didn't know, I don't remember walking out that door, but I may have. But suddenly I was in this room that was all white with lots of windows. And there was this lovely woman, and I think she was all dressed in white flowing clothing. And I said, and it was peaceful there. And I said, how did I get there? How did I get here? And she said, you called out for help. And but it was interesting. I called out for help. Here was this compassionate woman in this light, lovely place, and I could feel the self going into all its activity of judging and criticizing and all that. So even when we know the compassion, even when we know that compassion exists and we've had an experience of it, we still have the self to work on. And Well, I was going to give you an example of the hell realm from How to Grow a Lotus Blossom, which Reverend Master Jiyu had a vision of this hell where it was very gray, and all the people there had, I think, gray robes and gray hoods. They were all in this room where all the doors and windows were gone, and it was completely open. And they had these thing of bars that they would carry around and hold in front of them. And what she realized was that they were causing their own hell by keeping these bars in front of them, and that at any time they could put down the bars and walk out of hell. And she said it was so sad to see these beings holding up their bars. And we kind of do that. We kind of hold up stuff in front of ourselves and are unwilling to walk through that door because it's scary. It's scary to let go of what we know, even though it's suffering, and walk into the unknown. We don't know what will be there, but I'll guarantee it's better than the hells. And it's worth walking through. I still have a few more bars to walk through, but from the ones I've walked through, I'd say it's pretty darn worth it. The compassion that is our very nature and at the depth of the heart of all beings is unfathomable. It embraces everyone and every aspect of ourselves and others equally and without exception. The Buddha did not turn away from or reject anyone. He offered everyone the teaching in whatever way he felt they could accept it. And if we are fortunate enough to hear the Buddha's teachings, which we all are, we can know that there is a way out of suffering. And it isn't easy. We have to be willing to not run away from our own suffering. When it is there, it's just there, and we can be with it. And when it's gone, we can let it go. I have found in my training that as my faith has deepened, as I go on in this practice, I'm shown more suffering to sit with. And it gets hard, it's deeper suffering, and it's stuff I have to be willing to be with. But it isn't easy, and I just have to be with it without knowing. It's not like I can see the love of the unborn right out there waiting for me as I sit through the suffering. I'm sitting in this suffering, and that's all there is. And I just have to be willing to do that. And I'm shown more as I go on in this training, and I have to be willing to trust in the dark, in the unknown, and just be willing to do that. And sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't, and I just keep going. Besides just sitting with our own suffering, this practice of meditation and training allows us to see aspects of ourselves that we may not like, that create suffering for ourselves and others. And it can be very hard to look at that and to realize, gosh, I'm very critical of people, or sometimes I put people down, or I make jokes that aren't really, that are kind of slightly off key, or are putting people down, and sometimes until we do the practice, we don't see this in ourselves. And I find as I go on more, I see more and more subtle ways that I can create harm and that I can hurt people. And I don't want to do that. And none of us want to do that, because we all have Buddha nature, and it is our true nature to be genuinely kind and caring about other people. And we once read a story from the Reader's Digest about, I think it was a doctor who became Himmler's doctor. Do all of you know who Himmler was? He was, the right hand of Hitler, and doing incredibly awful things. And he had stomach problems, and severe stomach problems, because he was going against his true nature. He was not aware of it at all, but when we go against our true nature, we create suffering for ourselves, and we don't see the connection between the suffering and what we're doing. So we are all blessed to have found the Dharma, and we can now see the connection, and we can make the changes that we need to make. And I don't say this is easy, because the self is very strong, and it can be very hard to change our patterns, to change our karmic tendencies. But it's what brings an end to suffering for ourselves and others. And as we go on in this practice, I think, first of all, we identify with the suffering. This is who I am. This is how I am. This defines me. But as we go on, we start to see that the suffering is not the reality. That the suffering is just something that is arising and passing away because of our past actions, and because we don't know how to be still in the midst of the suffering of those around us and the suffering of the world. And I think in this day, there is a lot of suffering around us and a lot of suffering in the world. And it can be very hard to be with that and to accept that. But we don't wallow in suffering. When we feel the suffering, we feel it. We don't turn away from it. I mean, this is the ideal, right? It's very hard to do. But when we give in to anger at what is going on, we create suffering for ourselves. We turn away from our own Buddha nature. And we turn away from the being who is doing the things that make us angry. Because it is our true nature not to judge. It is our true nature to accept all beings as having Buddha nature. It doesn't mean we like them. It doesn't mean we accept what they're doing. It doesn't mean that we don't do something about it. But we can act better if we are still. When we act from anger, we actually create more suffering in the world. When we act from kindness and stillness, we decrease the suffering in the world. And so we can become as Kshtigarbha. When we let go of our judgments, when we let go, and this we do whenever they arise, if we can. I can't do it all the time. It depends on my state of mind. But when we can let go of our judgments of others, well, first of all, we have to let go of our judgments of ourselves. When we judge ourselves harshly, we're kind of hardening our heart in some way. We're turning away from our own Buddha nature. And there is a reason why we are as we are. We have to have compassion for that and be gentle and kind and patient. And it does work. we can start to let go of our judgment of ourselves, and we can start to actually be kind towards ourselves, no matter what we see within ourselves, no matter what we do. We can be kind to ourselves, because that is the only way that we can change, through kindness. And when we can accept ourselves, then we can start to accept other beings. And we can not turn away from them. It can be very hard to turn towards someone who is deeply suffering. I know for myself, and I always show my humanity in these talks, but I know for myself sometimes when I see someone suffering deeply, I just feel compassion for them. And I want to help them if I can. And sometimes I want to get as far away from the person as I can, and it could be just the type of suffering they're going through, and something I haven't dealt with in myself, or maybe it's too much for me right now. But we become, as Kshtigarbha, when we don't turn away from other beings, when we listen, when we are kind, no matter how we're feeling. And the world can sure use kindness right now. So the more we can work on ourselves and show kindness in the world, the more the world will be a better place. And there are lots of people out there who are showing kindness, who are training and are doing really good things. And I saw a YouTube video of just such a person, and I looked at it again yesterday so I could refresh my memory on it. But it really struck me, this man who was, I think he was Pakistani, and he lived in a very poor family, and he eventually came to the United States. And when he arrived here, he had $3. So he, I don't know where he ended up at first, but he's just started working. And he was working really hard and working double shifts, and he eventually had enough money to start a limousine company, to buy one limousine. And then he had enough money to have a whole limousine company. And then he had enough money to open a restaurant. And in this restaurant, he made wonderful Pakistani food. And he loved cooking, and he loved making food and serving people. And then he started inviting the homeless in. And he said they could come any time to any meal. He said that sometimes there would be 20 people there, and sometimes nobody came. But when somebody came, he was really happy. And I think the most important thing here is, besides feeding them, he treated them as equals. He treated them as the Buddha, even though he wasn't Buddhist. But he treated them as a fellow human being, and not as, ooh, the homeless, ooh, I'll feed you, but But it was that all acceptance that turned these people's lives around, and was so impressed them, made them feel like they were loved by God, and that they were worthy, and that they weren't turned away from. And that can have an extraordinary impact on someone. And he loved doing it. And he became happier as he continued doing it. And it also reminds me of Mother Teresa. The thing that struck me about her was that she went into these places where there was what was considered the lowest of the low, the people who were turned away from, the lepers, those who were out on the street. And it was not easy for her to do it. I remember reading that the first person that she turned to and helped, it took all her courage to do that. But it was the same thing these were fellow human beings. These are not the outcasts. These are not the scum of society. These are my equals, and I will help them. And that so impressed me. And so we can start becoming like that. When we see someone who is homeless, perhaps just not turning away in our hearts. When we see someone who is suffering, again, perhaps not turning away in our hearts. And if we can, offer them merit, or offer them a kind thought, or a kind word. This can have a revolutionary impact on someone, just our kindness. And when we're standing in a grocery line, and we're in a hurry, and we just stay patient, and let our frustration or our anxiety just come and go and become still, that is helping other beings. And this is part of our training. So Kshtigarbha can point the way for us and help us when we're floundering, but he can't take away our suffering. Nor can our friends or teachers. We become as Kshtigarbha when we don't turn away from others, when we are kind and gentle and are willing to listen. And we can't take away another's suffering. If somebody is not ready to hear a teaching that will help them, we can't do anything about it. If somebody is willing to hear the teaching and put it into practice, then we can help them by pointing out the teaching. So that's just how it is. I have a whole other page. So I wanted to end with a journal article by Reverend Master Koten, which is really lovely. It's called If I Make My Bed in Hell, which some of you have probably read. So I think we meet Kshtigarbha here in two different guises, in the man who helped someone and in the man himself. Wait a second. And the someone himself. Anyway, the two people involved. The following is a story. I cannot prove that the events happened exactly as described. I can only repeat what was told to me. In Berlin of the 1920s, there was a young man who was an inmate of a house of prostitution. How he came to be there I do not know. Probably he was forced into it as a boy or fell into it as a result of poverty. In any case, wealthy old men now paid to watch him rape other men, and life in this hell realm had continued in a seemingly unending cycle for as long as he could remember. Sometimes during the day, he would go for long walks in the suburbs of the city, just to get away and forget for a while. It was during one of these walks that he came upon a large estate surrounded by a stone wall, which had fallen down in some sections. Inside the wall were extensive gardens and trees, including huge rose bushes. Overcome by the beauty of the place, so different from his daily surroundings, he took to going there whenever he had a free moment. He would sit on the grass and forget for a while what he was and what he did for a living. Thinking the place to be some sort of park he had discovered that no one else knew about, he was startled one day to encounter an elderly man wearing what was obviously some sort of religious habit or robe, although he had never seen anything like it before. Over a period of time, he began having conversations with the old man. The priest, or so he thought of him, never asked what he was doing there, or indeed anything about himself. He simply treated the young man as a friend. So, I'd say that was Kshtigarbha there. And perhaps as a result, the young man soon told him everything. When he was finished, "What can I do?" And the priest replied, "Seek God." "How does someone like me seek God?" "Be gentle." It might seem strange to tell someone whose occupation was violent sexual assault to be gentle. We, in our age of lifestyle and career choices, often forget what it means not to have a choice. The priest's words fell like a seed into fertile earth. It was something for him that he could do. 15 years or later, when all such as himself were rounded up, along with many others, and sent to concentration camps, the man ended up at Buchenwald, where he died. In the camp he was seen as somewhat of a saint because of the gentleness and compassion with which he cared for the dying, especially the more horrible cases that others found impossible to deal with. I will leave the story as it is without commentary except for the following. Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there thy hand shall lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, let only darkness cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to thee. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with thee. So this comes from a psalm, but I think I'd like to end on that note. So thank you very much.